premise in a new implementation. And yeah, our usual disclaimer that simply means that I'm going to present to you to the current status of what we have, and but however, SAP reserves the right to make changes in the future should that be required. The entire presentation is structured around our activate phases, so that means we have a preparation, exploration, realization, deployment, and run phase. And for each phase, there's different topics that need to be looked at and different considerations that we recommend you guys to take. And yeah, once again, if you guys have any questions, just interrupt me if some things are maybe entirely new and I don't want to lose you in the context of whatever I'm going to explain. So let's directly jump into matters. And we're going to start with the first question that you will probably have for the preparation phase, and what should be considered during the initial project preparation, also meaning that you're about to set your strategy and plan what you want to do during this implementation. And that takes me straight into the Fiori topic. And for Fiori, we've had a bit of a change compared to old SAP ERP, but from what I understand, you guys come from Oracle, so that shouldn't affect you much. So I'll keep this short here. What we do recommend is that you run an embedded Fiori deployment, meaning you deploy the Fiori's front-end server on top of the backend, of the S4HANA backend. If in the future you might have a multitude of systems that you want to connect to and provide a central entry point, then we would recommend that you go with our SAP Launchpad service, which is provided through our business technology platform, BTP, our cloud platform, and that can connect then to a multitude of S4HANA system and also other systems. But if you're talking about only one system, then we would typically recommend that you go with the embedded deployment. And that, for example, technically gives you the opportunity and the possibility to work with mechanisms like rapid activation. And that simply makes it easier to activate content and provide faster access to it. This presentation has a lot of links in it, so feel free to later on click those links. I will obviously share this presentation with you afterwards. And yeah, for some topics, we're going to stay on a more generic level, but if you want to read a bit more about it, feel free to later on go through those links and let us know if there's any further questions. Now for the platform coverage, you can see a short overview here, what sort of release levels we're talking about. So for S4HANA 2021, so that's still the current release, but will next month be overtaken by the new release, 2022. That means we have an S4 core release, which with 2021 is 106. That will be 107 next month. And you have a front-end server. You have a foundation server 2021, FND. That will, of course, be 2022. And underneath, we have our ABAP platform release with release 2021, which will then, of course, also be 2022. And that, in turn, is now 7.56 basis and will be 7.57 then coming next month. And we also have an SAP kernel release underneath, which is 7.85. And so on. So this is just to give you a bit of an orientation. It's probably a bit overwhelming since you're coming from Oracle and so on, but we simply work with those release levels. We have simplified this a bit, and in many cases we are now using year numbers instead of confusing whatever other numbers, so it's easier to follow. And of course we have notes or knowledge base articles, however you want to call them. At SAP, we typically call them SAP notes. And those are also linked here that you can have a look at. And of course, there will be a new one also being released for 2022 next month. That also means we have some supported operating systems. For 2021, that's Windows 2016, 2019, SUSE Linux 15, or Red Hat Linux with release number 8. So the next topic that we have here is the user interface strategy, which is about when to use what. So the standard type of access would typically be the browser, and you simply launch our so-called Fiori Launchpad. And within the Launchpad, you then access the Fiori applications and also older technology, some old SAP transaction codes and WebImpro applications. We already have simplified and let's say innovated through a couple of areas, or actually a vast majority of areas what we had in SAP ERP, but not everything has been simplified. So that means we still, for some areas, are simply using some of these older transaction codes and WebImpro apps. But of course, from user experience level, this is all in line. So there's not much of a disruption in user experience for your end users. And they would all be accessing through the Fiori Launchpad in a browser. So that means also the browser can be run independent of operating system, device type, and so on, as long as it's mostly HTML5 and so on. That works with all the Fiori applications. But once we're talking about the old technologies, of course, that might result in some rendering differences, let's say, on different devices. So it's flexible, let's say, for everything, as long as it is Fiori. And if it is not Fiori, there's mechanisms that we provide that can be used for adaptation. So you will learn about those in the Fiori and UX lessons learned session, which I'm quite sure Rohit will provide to you. Okay, the other means we have here is the sub GUI for Windows. So we also have the possibility to still install a client onto Windows machines and from there launch it. But this is more geared at power users who are like basis and so on, who needs, let's say, some high access to older transaction codes and so on. But the vast majority should actually be going through the browser.
Thomas,
we also, yes, please.
Go to the previous slide. Another one.
This the previous one.
Yeah. So here you have mentioned that we can also use Windows 2016 2019 OS. So what our understanding was, either use RHEL or SLES. So that means for 2021 you can also use OSs 16 and 19. Is that correct?
Correct. So yes. These are also supported operating systems. Well, the final releases for the new, the final supported operating system versions for the new release for 2022 might change, but from what I've seen, there's no major changes in there. But for 2021, this is what it is. Yeah.
You can simply run an S4 HANA database on Windows 2016 or 2019.
Correct. Yes, that is possible. Yeah. We're talking here about the operating system, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, then let me move on. This one is simply just to mention, even if you're running on-premise and not cloud, you could obviously still run the on-premise version on a hyperscaler. That means you have a cloud provider basically providing the infrastructure, and you could still deploy onto that. That would not be considered an S4HANA cloud deployment, because if you're talking about S4HANA cloud, that means it's run by SAP. And if it's run by SAP, we will also use hyperscalers in the majority of cases. But at the same time, it has some particularities, let's say, with it. So if you deploy it yourself and you're installing it yourselves, and that, from what I've heard, is that you are an on-premise customer, that would not be considered S4HANA Cloud, but nevertheless, that on-premise release you can still install onto a hyperscaler. Just as a clarification, because we had some customers in the past that were a bit confused with this, what is cloud, what is not cloud. And there's also a blog here around the hyperscalers in case you want to have a look. Now, in your case, well, this is about sizing, and sizing, we have two different approaches, depending if you have an existing SAP ERP system or if you come completely new as a greenfield implementation. In your case, that would be greenfield. So that means you would simply be doing a sizing through a tool that we have, which is called the HANA Quick Sizer. That has been used also for many years for many different previous products that we've had. And we simply use the same tool also for S4HANA that will calculate a value which you would then give to the hardware vendor, and the hardware vendor will know then what sort of capacity the hardware needs to have to fulfill your requirements. So I'll keep this a bit shorter here because the SAP ERP conversion route is not the one that you're going. Okay, and what you should also consider is that for your sizing, it's not only about the backend sizing, but since you're also going to use a front-end server for the Fiori parts, that requires some separate sizing value, and you add those values up. So the backend value plus this value. So make sure you also run through this one, and equally also for embedded analytics. So for embedded analytics, since we're running on in-memory database, we can now also do real-time analytics against the S4 ERP data that you have in the system. And that also means if you have, let's say, a higher load of estimated to be run on analytics, also make sure that you run through this questionnaire here in the tool and add this value on top of the other two values. And that is what you're going to need to give to the hardware vendor, and the hardware vendor will then know what sort of hardware is required. Now for the maintenance planner, this is the next one here. That's our central tool that you would use for installations, upgrades. I mean, if you were coming from a previous SAP ERP release, that's also the tool that is used for planning the conversion. But well, in your case, for the new installation, first of all, and later on for upgrades. So this tool, well, you start the tool. Again, there's a lot of links in here. That's simply a web-based tool. You start it. It collects information, what you are planning to do, and then it will tell you what sort of files you need to download and feed the next tool that I'm going to mention later on. This is how the tool looks like. We have changed the look and feel, but since you're a new customer, obviously you wouldn't compare. This is rather aimed at explaining for those of customers that have only seen the elder tool. There is also a note around this where you can read a bit what sort of new features we have added, and there's also a video on YouTube that will explain the additional advantages of the new features. Okay. Now, if you are planning to run some add-ons, you have some specific business requirements that require some add-ons to be deployed onto S4HANA, you need to make sure that those add-ons are released for the S4HANA target release that you're going for. So either 2021, or you might go directly for the new release for 2022, I guess. Just make sure that whatever add-ons you require, for example, OpenText, that they are released for that specific version. OpenText will obviously be released, but I can also tell you that some add-ons need a little bit of time after the general release of S4HANA. So for example, OpenText, we're typically counting on between 2 and 4 weeks until they will have a version that's for the latest S4HANA version on compatibility level. Yeah, so if you have any requirements on that side, it's good to reach out to, for example, partner companies that would be providing those add-ons and make sure that they will provide this in time for you. I understand that you're just starting the implementation, so I guess there is still time, but nevertheless, it's a good idea to have this on your radar right from the start. Now, for version interoperability, in case you do connect with some other SAP systems, old NetWeaver systems, for example, there's an SAP note for that, and that will also explain then what sort of release versions we support on compatibility level. We also have a landscape recommendations wiki page, and we also have a tool called Upgrade Dependency Analyzer. Those you can use to figure out if you have specific dependencies and see if it's all compatible. Now for this one, it's just an overview with different releases, and again, the latest will always be in a node. There will be a new node also for 2022. And yeah, there's also a note here for the PI integration in case that would be something you're using. To have a look and make sure that you're on the supported release versions, because if there's any integration which is not supported, then obviously later on there might be issues if there's a support case and our support.
Thomas, we lost your voice.
Thomas, Thomas, I think can't hear you. Thomas, we lost you.
Can you guys hear me now? Hello?
Yeah, now it's better. Go on again.
Okay, not sure. So we have still issues? I'm sorry. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's just mention about output management. We have had for many years some older technologies in that space, and we have introduced some new mechanisms which are based on Adobe Document Server. And that specifically has advantages for Fiori integration and also support for print forms. And in order to be able to use those, you would need to install an Adobe Document Server. So it's not only S4HANA, but we are relying here on technology that is provided by Adobe, and that simply runs on Java. Since S4HANA is not based on Java, that cannot run directly on the S4HANA system, but it will require separate installation. In case you have a NetWeaver Java system for other purposes, the same one could be used. If not, it requires a dedicated installation, or you use a cloud service that we also have in our platform, which is called Adobe Forms by Adobe. That one could be equally used. And there's an FAQ note mentioned here and also some description of the new features that we're providing. Okay, for analytics, this is just a bit of a run through what sort of technology is underneath, and not only analytics, but also in S4HANA, the sort of development architecture model that we have underneath. So at the very bottom, we have our HANA database tables. On top of that, we have our core data services models. So we're not doing direct access to the database. We encapsulate this and add some semantic information, and that is what we call core data services models. Virtual data models also would be the more generic name for this. And this in turn, to bring it to the user interface, we use also OData services then. And on the user interface, we have, the majority is Fiori, and Fiori has HTML5, JavaScript, and so on. From there, we are going to the OData services. The OData services access the ABAP CDS models. From the CDS models, we go down to the database tables. And do some analytics in the system, of course, but we can also connect with BW for HANA, for example, and BW for HANA would equally be using CDS views. So the idea is, of course, to harmonize this and to make it easier to, for integration and so on. So we have a similar approach there, and from we of course also the BW for HANA side.
The voice is not.
So. Voice is gone. Okay, sorry guys, I don't know what's going on. Can you hear me now? Can you guys hear me? Guys, hello?
Yeah, Thomas, it's a little better now, but yeah, it's cracking actually in between.
Yeah, I don't know. Let me just give me a moment. I'll try to move a bit and see if I can improve it. So how's the connectivity here? Can you guys hear me better?
Yeah, it's better now.
Okay, let's try it from here. All right, so I was just with the CDS technology basically, and I just wanted to explain to you guys that
Thomas, I have a question. Sorry to interrupt.
it's again breaking.
No, I'm saying I have another question.
Okay.
Thomas, you mentioned integration in your previous slide. So just wanted to ask, can we use our ESB, like for example, to migrate data from our non-SAP system to SAP system? Do we have to come through PI layer or PO layer, or can we bypass it and we can directly use MuleSoft kind of ESB layer directly and integrate data?
Now you are very hard to understand on my side. What do you mean? What sort of layer? Sorry, I didn't. It was breaking.
और पूछ लो क्वेश्चन तुम्हें समझ आ गया you can write your am I audible am I audible now Thomas
Yeah, this is better. Yeah.
Okay, so my question was you mentioned integration. Now we have tools, ESB tools like MuleSoft, and then we have ETL tool like Informatica. So can we directly use those tools and migrate non-SAP data from non-SAP system to SAP, or do we have to go through your regular PI and PO layer?
It depends exactly what you want to do. I mean, we would have to look into. That's a bit has nothing really to do with the topics I just explained. So we would have to look into what sort of data you have, what sort of data you need to bring in, and in what sort of format they come. Because PI would help with the transformation of the format. So if the format is okay and whatever your tooling can already cater for what's required, then you don't necessarily need PI. So I will later on also mention some other tool that we have, depending. I mean, PI is more for direct data transfer. If you have some, constant feeding into the system, and but if it's the one-time transfer that you're bringing in, then we actually have some other tooling that I'm going to explain later on to you.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay. So now let me continue with the core data services. So core data services. So again, this is the semantic layer that we use on top of the HANA database. So we're not reading directly from the database, but we're adding a semantic information layer on top so that, we can basically add some additional intelligence, let's say, into it. And this is just a bit of a summary on this slide, why we're using this technology. Yeah, and also stressing that it's the same that we use on the BW for HANA side. I think with that, we move one level ahead. So for the database, our current long-term maintenance release of the HANA database is HANA 2.0 SPS 5, supported in June 2025. And then, of course, it would have to be upgraded. There's a note around this. And also on the HANA database, we have certain revision levels. So once it comes to the revision levels, it's not necessarily the highest one that you would typically go for, but you would read the notes that come with the S4HANA release, which tells which revision level we would recommend. And and if it comes to a situation during implementation that you open a support case and our support guys say that they would recommend a different one, different revision level, then obviously this has precedence over any other nodes. So whatever the support says, of course, would be then the one that you implement. Okay, on top of that, the next point is HANA parameter recommendations. There's a note for that, which can check your system and would tell you what sort of parameterization you can enhance. So it's recommended that you run this and put the parameterization accordingly as the tool states. Okay, set that. Let's move on. 1 second. Okay, so for scale out, so I'm not sure how big your data volume would be. But typically we would say, okay, unless you have a huge volume of data, we would rather want to stay on a single node, and we rather scale up in the sense of, we increase the capacity of this node rather than scaling out and putting so-called dialog instances on top. Because the dialog instances, well, that's what we used to do in ERP and in the old world. We can still do it, and we do require it if we have a very huge data volume, but because of the new technologies, it's often no longer required. So that's why the recommendations here. So use the smallest possible number of scale-out nodes. If you do scale out, all nodes must be identical size, CPU and RAM. You should not have a difference in here. That would have a negative effect on the system performance. And also all the other recommendations, I think you can go through these yourselves. No need for me to read them out for you. This is what we would recommend there for the scale out. As for HANA active. So so this is basically for failover scenarios, and the idea here is if you have a failover hardware, it would typically be idle unless you have a failover situation. So in that case, there is a possibility that you could put some analytical workload onto the secondary hardware, so the failover hardware. And this would be related to configuration in the, guys, any question?
Yeah.
If you don't have questions, please come out.
Yeah, one small question, Thomas.
Yeah, please.
As you said in the previous slide, that scale up is preferable over the scale out option. So in the scale up option, to what maximum sizing or to what maximum configuration we can go in a single node? Just wanted to have this brief information.
I would have to check the exact number. The exact number is pretty high. So we have seen this rather on very, very huge database deployments. Do you have an estimation how big your database would be, more or less?
Harsh, can you take up?
We have not estimated exactly, but it should be around 6 to 8 TB.
Around 10 TB.
Maybe we can go on a higher side, so 10, approximately 10, right?
Okay, yeah, that's still okay. You should still be fine on one. If we're talking about scale up, we're usually talking about 20, 30 and more. Yeah. So that should still be fine on one node.
I see. Okay. Please go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure, no worries. So, okay, coming back to this one. So we have the option for your failover hardware that you do some configuration in the Fiori applications, and some of the analytical workload you could put onto the secondary hardware. So that only works for some scenarios, but it's simply a mechanism here that you don't have your secondary hardware idle all the time, because obviously most of the time it's not being used, right? Because it's for failover. So just as a possibility, have a look at those notes if you're interested in the blocks that I mentioned here. Yeah. Okay, next one, native storage extensions. So what we have here, let me get the entire slide actually up here. So we have the possibility that we can use some what we call warm data also. That means we're not using only hot data, what we have in the database itself. So there it's constantly loaded into the in-memory database, but we offload some data onto disk drives, basically hard drives, and but they are still accessible through the S4HANA system. So what you can do in the S4HANA system, you can access both what is in your in-memory database, and you can also access the data that's on your not in the database, but on hard drive level. That works only, of course, for some data, and the idea is that this is data that's not being frequently used, but it's not ready to be archived yet. Again, this is just a possibility here, and that will have to be analyzed in more detail depending on what exactly your data is and what exactly you require there. This is just another slide about this topic, so that we have essentially it's pretty easy to implement, and little risk and so on, but still it requires, of course, efforts, and the efforts are quite a bit on the business side, because the business side will have to decide what data should no longer be required on the database level, but at the same time cannot be archived yet. So there's typically some finance data, because of whatever legal reasons it cannot be archived yet. And it still has to be accessible, but at the same time, business maybe accesses the information once in every 3 or 4 months. So there's no point to constantly load this into the in-memory database. That can help you save a bit of database cost, let's say. Okay, and with that, we move on to the next level here, which is the exploration phase. And in the exploration phase, the key question is how to find out what features are available in S4HANA and how you can best make use of them. So essentially looking into performing a fit gap or fit to standard analysis. Okay, for that phase, we recommend that you also are aware of our roadmaps. We have a so-called roadmap viewer tool, which has information about what's on our roadmap. And we also have accelerators in our Activate methodology, which are basically tools that help you implement the solution. And that also includes guidance for Solution Manager, an additional tool that I guess you've heard about. Okay. We also have a tool called the SAP Best Practices Explorer, the first link that you can click later on. And it explains you different best practices that we have, both on technology side and also on business processes side. So for the business processes, that would help you stay more on a standard level if you follow those best practices. And it's also possible to activate some of the configuration for those best practices in an automated manner. But if you want to do this, you have to do this right at the beginning of the start of your project. You cannot start configuring and then later trying to override. This does not work. So the system basically has to be empty, and then you put in the configuration, and then you can modify it as you wish, but not the other way around. This technically simply doesn't work. So that's why we also recommend that you look at this at an early phase in the project. And yeah. Here's a couple of thoughts here. And also, yeah, if you do decide that you want to implement this, you need to make sure you have all the required languages for your system already in there. You cannot activate this and later on add additional languages. That's simply also because of technical reasons behind it. So, of course, there's no issue on the system as such, but simply for this automated activation, that doesn't work if later on you add additional languages. And also another information here, if you are going through your fit gap, fit standard analysis, and you don't have the system configured yet because you're still busy building it up, what you could do to use in the workshops with your business is to make use of our so-called cloud appliance library, our CAL systems, CAL we also call them. And these are so-called, yeah, let's say we call them appliance templates as a pre-configured system, and you can create your own instance on a cloud provider. So for example, Amazon or AWS, Google, and so on. And if you do that, you have a fully configured system that you can play around with. You use it for as long as you require it, and after this, you just terminate the system and the cost will stop. So typically this would come with a cost of around, let's say $3 to $4 per hour. So that can be much cheaper than if you want to configure everything first in your system and later on figure out, oh, we actually don't need this, let's just scrap this and so on. If you just want to look into all the features and play around with them, maybe see if you can extend something, configure something differently, that could be a good solution. And yeah, so the cost comes mostly through the through the cloud provider because they simply charge for the infrastructure usage. Now, before you were already mentioning that you have obviously data coming from legacy systems and so on. So that is basically this topic here that we're talking about data migration. So data migration is an important task for any new implementation, and it needs to be looked into detail. What sort of data you want to bring in, customizing master data and so on. What are sources, which are sender systems? This has to be planned properly. And also if there's some decisions to be taken with business, yeah, of course, involve the business here. and make sure what sort of data you're pushing into the system will be the right data that you want to have in the system later on. And for the tooling, we have an integrated tool in S4HANA called the Migration Cockpit. This is essentially a Fiori application. And this is the recommended tool that we suggest that you use for data migration. You have templates there that you fill with the data. So ideally on your old system, you can extract this data, you put it into the tool here, and then you load it into the right database tables in the S4HANA system. If this migration cockpit and the models that come with it are not sufficient, you can also extend those models with the second tool, which is the migration object modeler, which is complementing the migration cockpit as it says here. And if you have very advanced, enhanced scenarios, then you would have to go with a separate tool, which is the third tool. So the first two tools, they are part of S4HANA, and there's no additional license, nothing. So it's part of the system. But the third one is a separate product and separate license, which is SAP Data Services. And that is particularly required if you want to do not a one-time data transfer, but you want to push in intervals data into the system. This doesn't work because with the other tools, because the other tools are meant to be used one time only. Okay, so some recommendations here. Do not underestimate these efforts, of course. Make sure you plan for the requirements early and see that you can use the migration cockpit as much as possible. If you have any doubts, that's exactly what our team, for example, is there for. So you can reach out with your doubts to Pulak and to Rohit and let them know, and they can involve whoever else from our team or from our product management and so on required, and we can advise if something can be done or cannot be done, or whatever specific recommendations we can give there. Okay. Now there's different mechanisms that you do here. You can transfer data using files or via staging tables. As a matter of fact, actually now, even if you think that you're using files, it's with the latest releases, it's all still being pushed into the system via staging tables. So we create tables. You would have the possibility to still modify data if required on those tables before you actually push it into the system. And you could also transfer data directly from an old SAP ERP system, but again, from what I understand, that's not where you're coming from, so that would have little relevance for you. So this is essentially the approach that we have basically since 2020 for 2 years now, that we combine the approach of data files and also staging tables. But the approach initially for you is nothing different. So you get templates basically in the tool, and the templates have to be filled and uploaded into the system. And then once in the system, you can modify them or you directly push them into the right database tables. So those templates make sure that your old legacy data goes into the correct tables, especially because if you compare old SAP ERP and S4HANA, we had a significant number of database table changes. So I think for you guys, maybe not such a big risk, but especially for customers that come from old ERP, they run a big risk that they are simply not aware of the new tables and they might accidentally push it into the old tables. And that is creating performance issues later on. So that's why it's very important to work with these templates and put the data into the right tables.
Yeah, Thomas, Thomas, one small question.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As you told about, there'll be different templates where you can put the data and push it into different tables in S4HANA. How about different kind of validations which are required while putting the data into S4HANA? For example, item which is not part of the item master should not get into this, or there'll be certain list of values for certain fields. Nothing beyond those list of values should get into the field. So how do you manage those validations?
Yeah, so it depends what sort of validations you need. So as such, you first of all prepare the data. So if there's already some pre-validation that you can somehow do by extracting the data from the old system, of course, you do this right on the old system. If this cannot be done, then you first take the data and you upload it into the staging tables. This is exactly where the staging tables come into play, where you can still run some checks or modify data where it is required. You can also do some coding, let's say, if required against those tables. And only then you would push it into the system. That's how this works.
Okay, sure. Any other questions from the team?
I have a bit more details here also about the staging tables.
Damas, one question. This cockpit can support to integrate with the Oracle database also?
No. So what you do is you first extract the data from the Oracle database, and you need to have the data at hand, and then basically you push it into with the tool into those staging tables. But there's no automation that we can directly connect to Oracle database tables. We can connect with old SAP, ERP, but we cannot connect with Oracle. So you would have to basically extract it and then upload it. So I'm going to explain, maybe wait a bit more. I'm going to explain a bit more in the next couple of slides how this works.
Okay.
All right. So, okay. So again, here we're looking into the staging tables. So the idea is, yeah, we have an improved user experience. We have an easier way to populate the staging tables, and we also have the possibility to have some status tracking and messages to see if something is going maybe wrong while we fill the data and those type of things. That also means we store all the data in staging tables. We can do this in the local S4HANA database, or we can also use even an additional HANA database, let's say, before you push it into the actual HANA database, if you want to keep this separate. This is done essentially through XML templates. And these XML templates you have to fill. But that's where I mean. So these templates help you to fill the target tables, but they don't have any relationship to your source tables. That's why there's no mechanisms to check against Oracle and to see where to pull data from or something. This is simply not designed like this. There can be third-party tools available that might take over part of this, but again, this would be a third-party tool and it's not part of the integrated tooling. Okay, so that's what it says in the last one here. Still other tools, external, can be used for populating the table. So if you have maybe a partner product that somehow, I'm not aware of any product that would do this specifically with Oracle, because there you also have to deal with different release levels, different tables, depending on the version. But there might be. So since you guys come from Oracle, you might be knowing more than I know here. So in case there is, we can use external tooling, but the target is that we know how to fill those tables. And if the tool does that, that's cool, as long as they pick it from the right tables and put it into the right tables. Okay.
So Thomas, just one question. What are the different ways of creating staging tables?
This is done automatically. So you either, so basically you just use the templates, and the templates that the tool provides, our migration cockpit, will automatically create those tables. The only choice you have there is you can decide if this table is being created on the local S4HANA database or on an external HANA database. But otherwise, you don't have to create them. This is all done in an automated manner.
And we can define what kind of fields and kind of data we need to populate. That can be defined by us.
Yeah, so you need to look into the actual templates to see what's in there, and those you need to fill. If this is not sufficient, then you need to extend it. That was the second one I had before. Then you work with the migration object modeler and you extend it. But as a standard, you first work with the standard fields. That's exactly what this template provides, and will tell you essentially what sort of data you should fill. But if you have whatever specific requirements, then you can extend this through the migration object modeler.
So through
I suggest
model, we can customize the staging tables in case it is not a standard template.
Yeah, correct. So exactly, you would do this through the migration object modeler, and then once you have done that, then you start basically creating the table, and it will be catering for the additional requirement that you might have. Correct. So again, this is also a Fiori application.
One question. So can we use these staging table later on also, other than the one-time migration, or it is only for one-time?
No, only one time. Only one time. That's very important to understand. It's only one time. We are not supporting. We are not supporting incremental.
Okay. Suppose we miss some data and we identify after a month that okay, we missed some in message and I have to add more message. So
the problem is this doesn't have any conflict handling implemented. So you can theoretically, at your own risk, push more data, but we do not recommend this because it should only be done one time. Otherwise, we recommend that you use SAP Data Services, because Data Services is a separate product, and this is, how to say, it has more features, and it also has conflict handling in case you have a data clash and so on. Because if you're really just writing some additional data, okay, no problem. But the problem with such type of scenario is typically that you might be pushing in some data and overwriting some already existing data. And then, of course, you end up in a mess. So that's why we recommend not to do this, and that this tool is not designed for this. So it's not designed for having some data conflict management. If there's any discrepancies that need to be dealt with, but Data Services is. So in case you think you need that, then I'd suggest that you look into Data Services, but again, that's a separate license.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Then here's just a bit of this slide is mostly for customers that might have seen earlier versions. So it's just providing a couple of Delta features that we have with 2021. There's a couple of new features being added also with 2022. What's very important to understand is the migration cockpit is this Fiori application. It is not an old transaction which we had in previous releases called LTMC. Sometimes there's a bit of confusion, but it shouldn't confuse you because you're new to it. So just use the Fiori application and done. Okay. Direct transfer is not relevant for you because that's against an SAP ERP system, so we can skip that. And here a couple of links again. So we have, of course, some extensive documentation on that. Also restrictions note, which tells what can maybe not be done. That would, for example, explain that you should not do incremental updates, what we just talked about. So we have this one. Then let me see. There's a rig block, the third one here. Have a look at that one, where one of our team members has written a bit of a summary of how this is best used. And then very important, do not make use of LSMW. So that's an old transaction. It comes from ERP days. It's very, very old, and it cannot deal with any specifics for S4HANA database tables. So it is very flexible, but the risk is extremely high that you push data into wrong tables, and that will mess up the system and will have an impact on your performance and so on. So again, do not use this tool. I guess not a big risk for you guys, but it's also recently not seen as much of an issue, but especially in the first, let's say, 3-4 years, we've seen a lot of issues because partner companies often being used to this old tool and then still using used and then creating whatever issues. So long story short, do not.
Hello.
Sorry.
Yeah, Thomas. So it is not recommended to use LSMW for direct data migration
Correct,
or any other case as well.
No, you should not use that because it doesn't have any validation if you are transferring data into the right tables. That's exactly where the migration cockpit comes into play because it has all these templates which are S4HANA specific. LSMW is just very open, so it wouldn't tell you what you should not do. And you run a very big risk that you push data into the wrong tables. So technically speaking, it's still there. Technically speaking, you could use it, but from recommendation point of view, you should not use it. And it's also not supported anymore. So if you run into any issue, our support will simply say, sorry, you're on your own. So do not use this tool. While on the other hand, if you use Migration Cockpit, you run into any issue, you let us know, you let our support know, and a solution will be provided. But if it's anything on LSMW, anything, just if you mention that keyword, our support will directly say, sorry, has not been supported for many years. Okay. So moving a bit ahead. So again, this is a Fiori application. There's a catalog of available migration objects. So these, I don't have the exact number now, how many it will be with 2022, but I guess we're between 250 and 300 migration objects now. So there's a lot you can do. Again, if it doesn't cover all that you want to do, it can be extended with the migration object modeler. Yep, that's what you need to know here. And with that, we are done with the data migration, and we move on to a new topic about extensibility. So extensibility, we have different types of concepts of S4HANA. We have
Thomas, one small question. Can you elaborate a little more on the migration objects? What exactly is the migration object and how does it work?
The migration object, let me see if I will just open that for you. That will probably make it easier to understand. Okay, so for example here, you have, for example, very different type of, for example, master data here, batch, unique at plant level, and so on. This is something you basically your business also has to look at and tell you what sort of data you want to. Is that clearer now? Condition contracts, and that all of them come with certain database levels, database tables that need to be filled, and that simply has to be made sure that it goes into the right tables. I suggest you have a look at this link, and then if you have specific questions, just collect them maybe in an email.
Sure.
And let our team know, and we can help with resolving this. We have very good connections to the product management there, and they're very eager also to resolve this in case there's any trouble.
Right. Right. Yeah.
All right. Okay, cool. Okay, then let's jump back to where we were, and let's move back to extensibility. So if you're talking about extensibility of S4HANA, that means extending either inside the system, inside the S4 system itself, or you extend outside. That means what we call side-by-side extensibility, and that is done on our cloud platform, basically on the SAP Business Technology BTP platform. In-app extensibility means, again, you add stuff into the system. What we recommend to make your system easier to be used for future upgrades and so on is that you use this not extensively, not like in, let's say, old traditional way, but ideally you rather write extensions in the cloud platform, in the business technology platform. And that connects with your S4HANA data, and that keeps whatever extensions independent of your core system. And that means also during an upgrade, you have, less trouble, less testing, and so on. Nevertheless, as I said, you have both possibilities. So of course, this is a very complex topic. So this is just a very brief introduction, because with such a topic alone, we could talk for hours. So the first link here gives you it is always the current development tools link. So whatever we recommend, you would always find this under the first link. The second one is about Fiori tools extensions to the Business Application Studio. So the Business Application Studio is actually a web-based tool for doing your extension coding, and this is the recommended tool that we would suggest to you. And there's also some extensions for Fiori in there, so have a look at those. If you do want to do some modifications to classic user interfaces, that means SAP transactions or web intros, we have a tool called SAP Screen Personas, and that's a separate tool. You just have to install it. And with that, you can, for example, remove some fields on old UI, or you can change a label and so on. But that's for the old UI. That's, the old ERP transactions and with Impros. This is not the one to be used with Fiori. But nevertheless, we have some customers that want to do some changes on that level. Now, we also have an Open SAP course. I'm not sure if you heard about Open SAP already. So this is a platform we have where we do training courses free of charge. And there have been several trainings that also our team has developed there. And we have done some time ago a course on extensibility here. And this is the first link, so that for some areas, some minor things have changed, but the majority of things still hold true. So if you want to go through that course, feel free. Again, it's free of charge. Has a lot of videos and presentations and so on. Again, now drilling down into in-app extensibility. That means you change in the system itself. If you change in the system itself in S4, you have two possibilities. You either do an ABAP custom development, or you do a key user extensibility. A key user extensibility is simply through a guided tool, and it has literally it has either no coding or almost no coding. So the idea is it can be done in a very easy way, even by a business user. On the right-hand side, we have side-by-side extensibility. That means extensions on the business technology platform. There, we can use ABAP, or we can use also other technologies like Java or Node.js and so on. We have our ABAP development tools as an add-on as an add-in component to the HANA Studio, which is based on Eclipse. Here it says necessary for creating some objects like CDS views. In fact, it's mostly necessary for enhancing, modifying CDS views, because to create CDS views, you can even do this through a Fiori application that we have in the system. The next one is probably not so much relevant for you, but several old customers that come from SAP ERP, they're asking us about a test data migration server, which was a tool for automated testing. And that one is not available on S4HANA simply because it has never been designed for S4HANA. In case you're wondering what we are doing in this case, in fact, we are working on a follow-up solution, but that is still under development, but possibly might be ready in 1 or 2 years. So it still takes a bit of time. Okay, then the section below is about support connections. So if you need our support to connect to your system, there's a couple of extension types or connection types, let's say, that need to be made available and opened. So this is just a list of those. That's something for your basis team. For performance tuning, we have a tool called SQL Monitor. That's just one of the tools where you can trace different SQL calls to the database and see where maybe time is being lost. So you get a better idea what might be going wrong. And we also have a tool called STAD, the transaction, which is at the bottom here, where you can analyze workload statistics. And again, there's some blocks in here that explain this in a bit more detail. Okay, so much for the exploration. On the implementation configuration and what should not be forgotten during those. Okay, so I mentioned before for the front-end server, for Fiori, we typically recommend that you use it as an embedded front-end server. You might have specific requirements if you want to allow direct access for external parties, that we might want to have a dedicated front-end server. And then, of course, this needs to be planned for, it needs to be tested, needs to be set up. So that's something to look into. But if you don't have such sort of requirements like external access and so on, so typically embedded is the way to go. And our vast majority of customers is using embedded. But this is just to mention that there are other options in case it would be required. Now for the migration cockpit, we're coming a little bit back to that topic. There's a couple of notes that you should have a look at, which always have the latest information. So make sure you have those on your radar. And we also have a tool that we recommend, the Node Analyzer, which is coming with an SAP node here, the one mentioned here, 2596411, to check if all relevant nodes for the migration cockpit have been installed in the latest version. So make sure you also run through this one. Because that could, for example, update if there has been any correction or something in a database table or something in the template. Make sure you have this in the system. Those templates, these are XML. You typically open them with Excel, and then you fill those tables there, copy paste, or again, tools could also do this, third-party tools and so on. Do not change the template structures, of course, because then you're messing up with the tables that this template would be filling later on, and that simply would be resulting in runtime errors once you try to fill the data. So do not delete, rename, change, and so on, what it says here. And if there's any further doubts on this, follow the last note here. Also, we have a default size limit for each uploaded XML as of 100 MB. You can change a parameter to set this up to 160 MB, but it cannot be more than 160 MB at once. If you have more data, which you will inevitably, of course, have, you need to do this through multiple files. We cannot do files on gigabyte levels and so on, simply because of technical implications there. Okay, now this is a little bit about the staging tables. Again, you can still do changes on the staging tables where necessary. You can also process multiple objects at once, and so on. This is very detailed. I think probably best that we don't go into too much detail here yet. This is simply if you have an error situation there, if some data is colliding, and then it would show some issues there. And what we call freeze triggers, if you have such a situation, well, you either have to finish the transfer or you restart the transfer. But again, this is a bit more detail. So first of all, I would suggest you start looking into it and start using it. If you then have such sort of issues, then just let us know. This is just showing where you do a restart and those type of things. This is how this tool looks like on a technical level, let's say. Okay, now, yeah, what also can be done for testing a lot for a new implementation is sometimes doing client copies. And what we've seen with client copies is that some customers struggle with performance, how to do this, and which made me around a year or two, this is in fact that old slide, yeah, collect a couple of recommendations what can be done to improve the performance. So in case you do client copies for whatever purposes and you run into performance issues, you might want to go through those links here and see how you can improve this. This is again some more recommendations. Again, I don't think we have to go into all of these in detail, but it's simply a couple of additional recommendations how to improve the performance for the client copy. Also make sure that if you do a client copy, you don't use the old transaction called SCCL, but you use the SCCLN, N like new, and that's the one to be used. That's the faster one. Technically speaking, we still have the old one in the system, but we don't really recommend to use the old one anymore. Sometimes, in case you wonder why we have old stuff in, if you don't recommend it anymore, that's often because of legal reasons and so on. We cannot simply remove this, especially if we have customers coming from an older release, going to the new release. That's why, in fact, we also still have the old database tables in there. Even if a customer comes from ERP, moves to S4HANA, we are not allowed legally to delete those old tables. But we actually have SAP notes then for those customers, which tell them how they can delete them, because we obviously do not need these old tables anymore. Okay, embedded analytics. So in S4HANA, you can do real-time analytics against the ERP data in the S4 system, but it is not meant to be a data warehouse. So the idea is not to connect a multitude of systems for data transfer, data aggregation, and so on, and bring this into S4, because that's simply not the purpose. S4HANA has analytics, but it's still not a data warehouse, but an ERP system. So if you do have data warehouse requirements, which I guess your company has, you would be running a separate data warehouse. That can be a BW or BW for HANA, or yeah, of course, if you decide a third party is also possible, but it should be a dedicated data warehouse. For the embedded analytics that we have in the system, we have a multitude of tools. These are often Fiori apps, such as some of them that are mentioned here, custom analytical queries and so on. To set up embedded analytics, there's a couple of configurations that need to be done, which are described in the notes that you see at the bottom. We also have scheduled background jobs, and they are usually configured in a way that most customers are happy with. But if you do want to do some changes, look into the note here and then see if what you want to change. Credit management. If your business requires to use credit management, then it's important to go through the credit management configuration guide. So this is, simply has a couple of technical implications. So prerequisite is that your business wants to use credit management. If they do, go through this. If not, you can ignore it. But if they do want to use it, do not forget to look into this guide. Okay, next one. Let's look into the deploy phase and the cutover preparation. So what activities should not be forgotten? First of all,
Thomas-san, could you go back to the previous slide wherein you have mentioned the credit management? Could you give here some of the indications whether any API can be exported from the credit management system, etc.?
Sorry, I didn't quite get that. What do you mean API? In what context? Sorry.
Data can be exposed from credit management system to the legacy, the Oracle systems, or the vice versa?
That you would have to, yeah, well, I'm only looking at it from the technical side. There's a couple of technical configurations that we need. Whatever specific question that you have for integration here, you better address this in your finance lessons learned session. Rohit, I guess this would also be planned.
Oh.
Yeah, so
yeah,
not sure
Thomas, it is also planned.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Rohit. So yeah, so this is more, we are looking at now more at the technical aspect. So I'm not the finance expert here, and it's simply that there are some technical configs that you should not forget. Whatever you can get from the old legacy system or not, I'm sure there's some mechanisms, but our finance expert should answer this to you. Okay, moving forward to deployment phase. So before you go live, you want to make sure that you have good performance, that you've tested this. And if you have any performance issues, I recommend you look into the SQL Monitor, run this tool, some other tools as well, STAD and so on that I mentioned before, and make sure that you improve the performance. Obviously, you don't want to go live with some Fiori applications, for example, where this, you know, the business would have to wait a couple of seconds and, you know, things are not loading. And this, of course, would leave a bad impression. And what we've seen with many implementations, this is not mostly faulty in the system. It's mostly because of whatever has been configured using old database tables and so on. And that can be, of course, improved. And in case you need to find out how, that's where such tools like SQL Monitor come into play. Then we have of course, we also have a migration or a cutover plan, let's say, where you would be documenting the sequences and estimated times, what should be done on technical side, what should be done on business side. Make sure you test this, you have a mock run first, and you document this accordingly so that there's no surprises during the actual cutover. Also verify this with the business to see if they're happy with those times, and if they say they need shorter times, well, then we have to look into whatever downtime optimizations that could be done. And there's also some highlights on a technical checklist, which are at the bottom. So yeah, make sure that scheduled jobs and so on are as expected. Make sure embedded analytics have been configured, tested, and so on. Make sure that your operational team is understanding how to handle support requests, what needs to be requested from SAP if required, if it's if it's not just a simple configuration, but maybe something wrong on the system. Backups, of course, should be scheduled. High availability should have been tested. Support connections should be open. A couple of those things mentioned at the bottom. And that will take us into the run phase. That means you are about to go live and run the system. And you would be asking yourselves, how can you improve the system over time and keep it up to date? That leads us to our release schedule. This is the current schedule. We are about to release version 2022. Then next year will be version 2023. So we have, in fact, we have yearly releases here, and that's the current situation. And we have feature packs here. Feature packs means basically per release we have 2 feature packs, and that typically would be released. The first feature pack, well, the major release coming in October every year, and then we have the first feature pack in February. We have the second feature pack in May, and that is going on like this until 2023. That also means once the feature pack is out, number 2, then the next one will only be a support package. So be fixes and not new features. Okay. And once you look into upgrading a system, you would be using the Software Update Manager tool, the SUM tool for that. That gets fed with information from the maintenance planner. And it would check for add-ons, for example, those type of things. And you simply run that tool then. We also have a readiness check for upgrades. So you can run this tool, gives you a couple of hints what you should look out for, what you need to prepare for the upgrade. This is something we just introduced last year. yeah, I mean, long time we had readiness check for conversions if you come from an old ERP system, but for upgrades, this was just introduced last year, 2021. And there's a couple of new features, and there will be more features added, so no need to go into those details. First of all, it's anyway for you the new implementation, and that will only become relevant earliest in a year or 2 or 3. Okay, downtime optimization. So also for upgrades, we have the possibility to optimize the downtime. We have mechanisms there called near zero downtime maintenance or zero downtime optimization. The more you want less downtime, the more effort you have to put into the preparation. So obviously, if the downtime would be acceptable in the standard, you go with standard. But I can already see if we're looking at 8 terabyte, 10 terabyte, yeah, you possibly might have to look later on into NZDM. But again, this will anyway not be a topic right now, and by then we might already have improved mechanisms in the standard. As of now, for your database volume, I would say NZDM would be relevant, but again, this can change in the future. This is also just summarizing. Yes, if you want more down or less downtime, you have to put more efforts. So I'll just keep this a bit shorter. Yeah, there's also a bit more detail on those. Again, I think in your case, I'll keep this a bit shorter because not so relevant for you yet. There's some notes around this near zero downtime maintenance, what's in the features, what are restrictions, what needs to be prepared, and the notes are written down here. We're basically writing data into shadow database tables, which are getting filled then during the you're having as little downtime there as possible. How to activate it? There's a certain flag simply in the tool. And here are also some more details, but once again, I think this is a bit too detailed for your current situation. So I'm going to skip this a little bit. Yeah, this is just to stress that the zero downtime optimization before had to be done with SAP support. In general availability, so also you and your implementation partner could do this on your own, provided you have been trained for it, which is explained in this note. And this is simply telling the project plan that you need to do mock runs and so on. You copy it, you create a cookbook, and essentially you do the actual upgrade there. We also have 2 notes that can be run as an impact analysis, which will tell you what sort of savings in time you could expect. So you might keep those in mind later on. And that leads me to the key takeaways of the entire session, which means, first of all, we recommend that you use an embedded front-end server. We recommend that you do the sizing accurately, and you obviously look into front-end server and analytics requirements for the sizing as well, and add those on top of the backend requirements. Look into add-ons in case you have some functionality that you require through an add-on, that the add-on will be supported on the target release that you're planning to go for. Again, I reckon you will be going for 2022, since you're, I think, just starting, and 2022 is about to be released. Then the Cloud Appliance Library, if you want a quick pre-configured system that can be created within an hour, literally. You just log onto the system, you choose your hyperscaler that you have an account with, and then within an hour, you will have a fully configured system available for you to use and play around with. Database, yeah, the data migration, we talked about this, so make sure you plan sufficient time. And if you have any doubts, feel free to ping this back to our team so that we can help you with that. Yeah, analytics, CDS, that's something new that we have with S4HANA compared to old ERP, core data services, and analytics, embedded analytics. And for the extensibility concept, once again, I recommend, or we recommend in general, that you try to keep your extensions outside of the core system, which will make your life easier for upgrades later on. So if you can, do the extensions in BTP. And also, yeah, there's typically more upgrades required with S4HANA than there used to be required in ERP, simply because technology and features and so on is changing way more rapidly nowadays. In cloud, even more. In the cloud releases, we have new releases every 3 months, so that goes even faster. Okay. Now a couple of more links. We have our guided answers. You see the URL at the top of the screenshot, where you can put in some keyword and you get an FAQ basically. We have a couple of links here collected for you. Product roadmaps. We have the Fiori apps library, a description of all the Fiori applications and details around them. Our S4HANA online help, best practices, maintenance planner, and a couple of open SAP trainings. Again, those are free of charge and so on. Just have a look if you think one or another would be useful for you. Release information note, restriction note. There will be new notes obviously coming with 2022 next month. And also a collection blogs here, demos, if you want to get a better understanding. And that's all I have for you. Are there any additional questions?
Yeah, Thomas, this is Sanjay Mathur. I think thank you for a very, comprehensive presentation. I have not a technical question, but sort of a general question. I think what kind of training and the awareness which an IT team and what is the duration of that training do you think we should I think one should be providing to all the technical so that awareness and the training. Second, the duration between the two things, I think the data migration, go live, and the various, I think, milestones which you have said, what should be the time intervals between these two things, between the various things, before you go live?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, for the trainings, that depends, of course, on the areas that the people work in. How is your implementation running? You have an implementation partner involved, I guess, right? Who would be your implementation partner?
For the business blueprint right now, we have Accenture doing it. And the build phase, etc., we are, I think, yet to even finalize it.
Okay. So, well, first of all, Accenture in this case should then be guiding you in that space. So, because there's a multitude of areas obviously involved. You have the business to be skilled up, you have the technical people to be skilled up, and it also depends on the sort of the knowledge level that you already have, which I don't have an overview what exactly you already know, what you don't know. And there's a multitude of trainings that we provide, also a lot of e-learnings and so on, also these open SAP courses and so on. So that, of course, takes some time, and also you need to be skilled up on these new technologies. So that's CDS views, Fiori, and so on. What you will learn also in the Fiori session is that, well, we recommend that you have a dedicated Fiori expert, and you will understand why, because there's a lot of new topics there. But again, this needs to be targeted at the group. So there's not, let's say, one specific learning path only for if you're technical, then that's what it is. It depends what exactly you will be doing, basically, because of course it has different dimensions. So what I would ask you here is go back to Accenture. They need to, because they are working with you more closely, they should have a better overview of what sort of skill sets are there within your team. Or within your organization, and provide a bit more clarity what they have seen and what they could suggest there. And we can, of course, from SAP side complement this, but first of all, this is an activity more driven by the implementation partner. And sorry, the second question once again?
Second question was actually the time duration between the preparation, data migration, and other activities before you go live. In the sense that how many months before this, before the go live, actually say, we decide a go live date, how many months before this, I think we have to, what is the time duration, I think one should keep it?
Yeah, for the data migration, again, this depends on the complexity of your data. For that also, it would be important to understand what that be required. If you have data that will be taken, but the data cannot be taken as such, but something has to be done. But let's say out of experience, I guess with your volumes and so on, I mean, you probably should at least count 2-3 months for those data migration activities, because I guess you will have plenty of stuff there, but it really depends. I mean, we have customers who are done within 3 to 4 weeks. We have others that take 4 or 5 months to deal with such type of activities. Again, I would also have to point at Accenture here.
Thomas, this is Manoj Gautam once again. You can safely assume we are a very complex kind of an organization, and a very large scale of operations are there. So keeping that in mind, roughly how much time we should take for this?
Again, depends really. I can only give you a rough number here, which possibly 2 to 3 months. But again, there needs to be more detailed analysis on this by your implementation partner. They need to look into this and see what sort of data volumes, what sort of data you're pushing in, if that is, yeah. So so please refer to them as well.